as you might have guessed, since he's at Sonoma State, Professor Matt Clark is a colleague of mine, although he is in a different department, which is now called Geography, Environment, and Planning. But I am not the only person at Sonoma State that's gotten a lot of money from NASA. He is the other person. And he is the principal investigator for a current NASA citizen science project called Soundscapes to Landscapes that he's going to tell us about. And he also runs our Geographic Information Systems lab, which is actually his lab. It's his group's lab. And he teaches classes on how to use all that stuff. And just as a fun personal note, a conversation between Dr. Clark and my husband is where we got the idea for the science behind the second CubeSat that we launched in late 2019. It was called EdgeCube, and the idea was to look at the red edge of the chlorophyll transition to see if we could tell seasonal differences or year-by-year differences on our planet. CubeSats can't point very well, and they don't have a lot of square centimeters to look at stuff. So if you look at the Earth, it's very bright and it's a good target. And both my husband and I are astronomers, so we didn't really know too much about looking down, only about looking up. So we needed somebody who knew about the Earth to give us ideas for topics, and that was Dr. Clark, and it was a very exciting topic. Unfortunately, the satellite did not work. So we're currently building our third satellite. It's going to do a solar experiment, but more about that one later. Anyway, it is my great pleasure to introduce my friend and colleague, Dr. Matthew Clark.
Oh, you're muted, Professor.
Yeah. Woo. Okay, that was a close call. My internet just dropped out, so I missed the whole introduction to me, but I think you did a good job. I'm back, and everybody hears me okay?
Yes.
Okay,
we
great.
can hear you just fine.
Loud
I
and clear.
basically told them what you did and told a little story about EdgeCube.
Oh, EdgeCube. Yeah, it was fun. I wish it would have survived.
I wish it would have worked, yeah.
Yeah, well, I'll show a little red edge actually in this talk, so we'll make that connection. Hey, well, thanks for having me, and I have a lot to talk about, so do give me the hook. If I start running overtime, feel free just to interrupt me and tell me to hurry it up. Okay, so let me share, and I want to share my sound too. Okay. All right, you see my screen okay?
Yes.
Okay. All right, wonderful. Okay, so this is at the high level, this is a NASA funded project that's been going since 2017. It started with a little seed money from NASA, and then they gave us a much bigger chunk of money to do it. It's part of their Citizen Science for Earth Systems program, where they actually want you to work with citizen scientists, which are people, just lay people in the public that are interested in science, that want to get involved in the scientific process in some way. They don't need to necessarily have expertise or a PhD. And this has been really fun to work with, a wide variety of people. And we've got some interesting data out of it too. So it's been really good science. So it's called Soundscapes to Landscapes. And it's at a high level, it's a animal biodiversity monitoring project that connects citizen scientists with space-based data for mapping, which I'll get into here. It's a really big collaborative project. I'm the principal investigator, but I couldn't have done this without my colleagues, which are listed here. And I'm not even listing everybody. And of course, I couldn't have done it without all the hundreds of citizen scientists. So the broader motivation for this project is, we're currently in a biodiversity crisis. We're losing species. Species abundances are going down across the board. Just in North America, bird abundance is down about 30% since the 70s. There's a lot of stressors on, the biodiversity on the planet. And that's a whole, multi-part class to get into. But that was my motivation, was trying to come up with a way to basically get smarter at biodiversity monitoring, and versus the traditional way that we've been collecting data on biodiversity is going out in the field. You observe birds, you observe plants, you take some measurements. You write down your data on a field form like I'm showing you here. you need to hook up with people with expertise that can get these kinds of biodiversity data for you. More and more, it's harder to come by these sorts of people, and then of course it's expensive. And then you often don't have enough data to do scaling across space or through time. And what we like to do with remote sensing is take data from, say, a satellite and link that with the in the field data and come up with some predictive maps. And we're often really like data poor when it comes to finding data on the ground, and because it's just expensive to get and you need a lot of expertise. So that was the motivation of Soundscapes to Landscapes, was like, well, hey, is there a way where we can maybe automate some of this data collection on the ground and link it to satellite data for our modeling? And the solution that we came up with in this project is to use sound in the environment to actually get interesting biodiversity and ecological information. And so what we're basically doing is we're turning our sound recordings into bird detections. And we're also getting some what we call ecoacoustic information, which I'll talk about. So it's beyond just birds. It started off as a bird project, but like good scientific projects, they tend to migrate, and you follow leads and you go down different tangents. And so it's actually become a lot broader than what we originally proposed, which was just focus on birds. We did focus on birds originally because there's a large citizen science kind of community, birders, people that are just super into birds that are willing to volunteer their time. So that was why we focused on birds, and birds make calls that we can detect. And what we're using in this project is artificial intelligence or deep learning. So we collect a lot of sound data, and we need a smart way to kind of churn through all the data that we're collecting and get useful information out of it. And then once we identify birds or other information out of the sounds, we then connect it with remote sensing data to make maps we call spatial modeling, which I will get into. So that's the kind of broad overview, is sounds collected on the ground, and then we're connecting that with some processing with artificial intelligence, processing it with spatial modeling, and coming up with a landscape perspective from these connections and modeling. And so that's where we get our name, Soundscapes to Landscapes. Okay, so but this kind of goes nicely with the theme you were talking about, de-stressing. It's always nice to go out in a natural situation and just listen to nature, and that's what we're going to do here. So let me go to my browser, and I'm just going to play you an example soundscape that we've recorded. So a soundscape is basically just a recording, and you're hearing a lot of different things going on in the recording. So this one, let's listen to. Hopefully my sound is working. Oh. Uh-oh, kicked out. All right. Well, we got a piece of it, so that's good enough.
That one sounded like the hawk to me.
Well, there is a hawk in there. Okay, so let me get back to my PowerPoint. If we had listened to the whole thing and it didn't cut out, there was a red-shouldered hawk in there. There's a Pacific slope flycatcher. There's a Cassin's vireo, a mourning dove, which we didn't get to in the recording, but it's really low, going woo, warbling vireo, chestnut-backed chickadee, and a western tanager. So this is a very biodiverse recording. It's basically a 1-minute recording with many different vocalizing birds in this one. And so you put your recorders out in different parts of your study area, and you're going to capture the biodiversity, but also there'll be other kinds of sounds, like from humans and other environmental sounds. Here's another view of that same recording. I'll just play this. What we do is we take the recordings and we represent them as spectrograms, which is time on the x-axis and the frequency on the y-axis, and then the amplitude of the sound, basically like how strong it is the brightness and color here. And what you can see is, visually your eyes pick up different patterns, and you can actually visually see the different calls. So let me play that. I have a little YouTube video. Hopefully it will play. Let's give it a go. There's the mourning dove. There's the hawk again. All right, well, I'm going to stop there in just of time, but you could get the idea that, oh, did you see that? Was I sharing the spectrogram?
Yes,
You saw the video?
it wasn't that much of a video. It looks sort of like just a screenshot.
Oh, I'm sorry. I forgot to share that bit. Okay, well, here it is again. Sorry, technology. You see the spectrogram, but what
Now
is,
it's a video.
okay. Okay, I'm going to stop it there. So you get the idea that these soundscapes, you're recording a lot of different kinds of information. And that one particular example was just birds, but you can also get other types of sound. Okay, so we're back on my slides. Do you see that? Yeah, okay. So other things that you can find in a soundscape besides birds, you might hear insects, mammals, amphibians. We call all of that biophony. Geophony is a term we use for things like wind, rain, and water, like flowing through a stream. Anthropophony is noises produced by humans, such as cars and airplanes, human voices, music. And then there's also quiet, which is the absence of sound, your quiet soundscapes, which may be good or bad, we don't have to put a term to it of being good or bad, but these are all just interesting components of the soundscape that can give you an indication of the biodiversity if there's a lot of biophony. It can also tell you about kind of the environmental conditions at the time, like geophony, and maybe whether you're close to human activity. Okay, so back to the project. Now that you kind of understand a little bit about soundscapes, our approach was to use these really low-cost sound recorders. They're basically like a circuit board with 3 batteries and an SD card to hold the data, and we can pre-program them. They're fairly cheap, about $100, and good for citizen science. We have like 120 of these, so we can just put them out. Some get broken, some get lost, but it's not going to kill the project. So these have been really good for us. They were specifically designed for like ecoacoustic monitoring and designed to be low cost. And so we've been putting them out around our study area, which is Sonoma County, Northern California, north of the Bay of San Francisco. Again, we've used citizen scientists, people from the community, also students at Sonoma State helped with this. And we collect the data, we put them out, and we use a little app on the phone to collect ancillary data about their location, the time that they're put out, who put them out, and the ID number. So we have like a map of where the recorders have gone out. And we leave them out for 3 to 4 days. And in the breeding bird season, which is the spring time into the early summer. So people deploy them, we go pick them back up. We have to download the data from the SD card. It's a little tedious, but we do get a lot of data. It's recording 1 minute every 10 minutes. And so it's 24/7, it's a snapshot of the day. We have this all written up in a paper, but this gives you kind of the high level statistics of, we worked with over 250 citizen scientists, lots of hours, over 8,000 hours, 5 different field campaigns, 5 years. We have almost 1,500 sites that we've been to around the county and over 1 million minutes of recordings. So this is what we call a big data problem, where we've got a lot of data to churn through and we can't possibly listen to all of it. This gives you a sense of Sonoma County, Northern California. And this is kind of the density of the spots. We were able to get both public and private lands, which was really nice to get, just outside of the park, like protected areas, but other places as well. So our approach to churn through these data in an automated way is to reach for deep learning or artificial intelligence. And, this is technology that's revolutionizing everything. It's, behind ChatGPT and face recognition, all this stuff, giving you those ads in Google. It's behind everything these days. And we actually reached for an algorithm that was pre-trained on millions of images that Google archived. And it's called ImageNet. And there's various flavors of these networks, but they're very complex. They kind of mimic the human brain with lots of neural connections. But in terms of like the application of identifying something in a picture, which is we're showing here, like if you present the computer with a picture of, say, this hummingbird, it will convolve it and do different things to the image to give features to this network that the network then can identify it as a high probability of being a bird, maybe lower probability of a cat, and even lower probability of a dog. But it gives you basically a probability that it is something. And for this to work, you need to train the algorithm on your data. And what we do is we present the algorithm with examples for all of our different species. We have 54 different bird species. We present images of the vocalizations of those species. So we don't actually hand it the actual sound data. We hand it image representations from the spectrograms. And you just give it a pile of examples, try and get lots of variety of a given species. But these things are fairly data hungry, so you give them as many examples as you can get, and then it kind of trains the algorithm. So it's initially trained on millions of images with like cars and boats and people's faces, but we fine tune it with your own data. It's a process called transfer learning. Anyways, this is a complex thing. I've just gotten into this myself over the last few years, but it is actually very accurate and works really well. And it gets better and better the more training data you hand it. So our training data came from a whole citizen science-based activity where we actually hosted, this is pre-COVID, we hosted people with a local NGO, and we went through with an automated system to basically, we pre-populated the system with example calls that were from a really kind of low-tech matching algorithm. And then we had people with their eyeballs and their ears really just look at the things that the computer thought were a given bird and check off whether it was or wasn't, like a blue check if it was, yellow or yellow X if it wasn't. And this is the example bird call here. And this is us, for this particular run, picking the ones that are good. And we did this with a consensus-based voting of many different citizen scientists, pulled all the data together, and that became the data that we used to train these deep learning algorithms. Okay, just to give you a little bit of graph, and it actually works. This is from a paper that I just published last month, finally got this out. But if you want to go deep into this deep learning, I can give you the paper. But at a high level, this is showing precision, which is of the detections that it came up with for a given species, how many were correct. And then there's this thing called recall in computer gobbledygook speak, which is of all the possible detections for a given species that are in your data, how many were correctly detected. So it's, you may not, for our particular application, we're really interested in precision. We just want to know when it predicts a bird for a given species that bird is correct. And we don't necessarily need to get all the birds that are in our data. So recalls, good, we want some recall, but we don't need to get all of them. We just want to be sure that at a given site, we get, when it says there is the bird, that it is precise. And so at a site level, we can say the bird is there at the site. And we don't need every single second to know, that the bird is there. So what I want to highlight here is that our precision when we actually present the algorithm with like little snippets, like let me go back, these little snippets that are held out and not used for training, but still these little 2-second representations that come out of this whole exercise, the precision is incredibly high, which is the mean is this black line here from all of our 54 bird species. So you can see it's like close to, you know, almost 100% precision, but it's very biased because we're basically testing it on these like little clips that are very similar to what went into the training. However, when we present the algorithm with like a whole 1-minute recording, which is more real world, we do find the precision goes down, but still the mean across the different species is about 85%, which is really good. And you know, I'd be hard pressed to get that sometimes with just the citizen scientists. So it could get better and better the more training data we had. So let's just say that at the end of the day, these data are good. It's not 100%. It's, you know, a machine, but this is really capable technology, and it's just getting better. Okay, so now we've got how much time do I have? 10 minutes.
Maybe 10 more minutes.
10 more minutes. Okay. All right. Yeah, I'm going to talk about this. Okay. So, now that we've got the birds identified from the sound data, they're at different locations across the county. One of our goals in this project was to then visualize the occurrence of different species across the county as a map, like basically predict where they occur. And that's what you're seeing here, these examples. These are maps of the probability of the species occurring across the county and little error maps to the side of that. And to do that, you need basically predictors that are spatial. Our data, the bird data are at the sites where we put out the recorders. But to make maps, you really need something that's continuous across the whole county. And this is where the cool remote sensing comes in. We use information on canopy chemistry from this thing called a hyperspectral sensor or imaging spectrometer. We look at time series of satellite data and look at we call vegetation phenology, which is the greening up and browning down of vegetation through time, you know, through the seasonal cycles. And then we look at vegetation structure, which is like the physical structure of the vegetation. All these are indicators of habitat that can be used to predict where different bird species occur. And so we're deep in this species distribution modeling work. This is basically where your species distribution modeling is where you take point data where you know your species and you link it with these spatial variables to make maps. And I'm looking at, because it's primarily a remote sensing project, a NASA funded project, I'm trying to see if additional kind of cutting edge NASA type of products, you know, from space can add value to the species distribution modeling over what people traditionally use, which is just put in climate variables, maybe distance variables like distance from the coast or distance from a road, and terrain variables like elevation. So I'm trying to see is like, do these remote sensing variables, the one in orange, actually help? And this is where the cool cutting edge NASA stuff comes in. One of the data sets we're using is called JEDI. It's the Global Ecosystem Dynamics Investigation Mission. It's on the space station. It's parked on the space station. It's just temporarily there. But it's really cool in that it is a laser. It's literally a space-based laser shooting out photons and measuring how long it takes for those photons to leave and come back. And it can map within the footprint of where those photons land, which are basically, envision this is like a little cylinder of sampling, these little purple circles. It goes over some forest canopy and it measures a vertical height profile. So you can see within each little cylinder of area where it's sampling the height of the vegetation, which you can think of that as being related to habitat. And maybe some birds like the top of the canopy, others like lower down in the canopy. And then we have a whole thing, which I don't have time to get into, but we spatialize the sample data from this JEDI sensor to make our own predictive surfaces. In this case, it's canopy height. And we've got 3 years of canopy height, and what we're showing you here is change from a fire. So this has been really neat to map basically vegetation structure across large areas. It's a global sensor because it's on the space station, and that's just coming in. There's a lot of new science coming out of that. Another innovation that we have in this project is the use of hyperspectral remote sensing or imaging spectroscopy. And in this case, NASA flew in a really high altitude jet, a sensor back and forth over the Bay Area. We're over here in the Sonoma County, and we are using it to simulate a space based sensor that's going up. NASA is creating one right now. The Germans just launched one called Nmap. And what this does is it measures through the spectrum reflected light in lots of detail. So you get these really beautiful spectra of reflectance that can be used to get different canopy chemistry. And I've listed some of the things we can get out of the data here. You can actually measure water content in the vegetation, nitrogen levels, lignin, cellulose. So all of these might be things that the birds might respond to. There's not a lot of science on this of linking this to biodiversity, but so it's a new field. Okay, so that's another product. And then another cool NASA product that we're using is data from Landsat, which has been around in various forms since the 70s. So has a long time record. And we're also linking that with another European satellite called Sentinel-2. What we do is we use these data to get this thing called NDVI, which is the vegetation index, which just goes from low to high. It's high if it's green veg and low if it's brown veg. And you can see here, this is through the years, the cycling of the vegetation up and down time as the leaves go on and go off. You can think of this as like it's coming on, rain, and then the brown down. You get multiple cycles. And then our hypothesis.
And Matt, your audio is getting a little choppy.
That too.
I'm not sure why. Your audio is getting a little choppy. So now you've disappeared.
You hear me now?
Maybe if we go video off.
Well, I think he turned his video off because I don't see him anymore.
I see he's frozen.
no.
For me.
Hello. Hey, all right. Well, I know I'm running out of time. I'll just make it kind of wrap it up. But so basically, at the end of the day, I did, just to show you some model results. I did find that with all of my variables, my remote sensing variables plus the terrain, there was a boost in accuracy, but it wasn't huge. So I'm still working on this. It's a very small boost in accuracy over baseline conditions, which are just using climate, distance, and terrain. But we do have a paper where we have used, before we had the deep learning bird data, we used existing data that's out in the public domain, and we show our modeling approach. And these are some example maps from our older model. This is in 2020. So you can see where we're going is that we're getting basically maps of different species. And these can be used to see where like there's hot spots of species richness. They can be used to investigate a given species and understand where it occurs and how it may be changing over time. Because the models are trained on remote sensing data, which is coming in over time, we can update the maps. And so it's a nice way to kind of look at biodiversity at a broader scale rather than having to just go out in the field, which is always fun, but this is a different way of looking at biodiversity. Let's see, I did have a lot more, but
I think we're out of time.
We're out of time, so I'm going to skip that. Okay, well, I'm going to just roll through that and just say I had a little bit more on different other ways of looking. Let me just show you this real quick, just to whet your appetite, because this is where we're going with a PhD student that I'm working with. We're not just modeling birds, but we're now modeling biotic activity with biophony, so we can actually make maps throughout the day of how this biophony changes. So this is related to biodiversity in aggregate from all the different animals that are making sounds. We can also map anthropophony, like human noise, and we can look at that through the day, and also areas that are quiet. And it's what's interesting with just one salient little thing that came out of all this is that the species richness and the biophony was not actually where we thought it was going to be. We thought it would be more in this side of the county where there's a lot of forest, but it turns out those are like redwood forests that are very quiet, as you can see over here. So they're very, very quiet. There's not a lot of biophony happening there. The biophony is really kind of rimming the cities on kind of that interface. Not the cities are here where you see this dark red, but around that and kind of that matrix habitat that's semi-rural. Vineyards that we have around here and wetlands and different things are kind of interspersed, but not in the deep, dark redwood forests. Also, we got a lot of biophony in our oak woodlands, which are to the east. So that's pretty cool. There's a lot of new, interesting ecological understanding coming out of these maps. And again, all this was based on the sound data and the citizen scientists' work. Okay, so I'll stop there and take questions.
We do have one request for your most recent papers in the chat.
Okay.
If you could get that to me, I could send it out to the group.
Oh, I will do that. Okay, great.
Yes, and let's give a round of applause to our speaker. That was just fascinating. And I've noticed that redwood forests are very quiet.
Yeah, I should have known that from the get-go, but when you think about it, you're walking in a redwood forest, like, yeah, this is really quiet. And it dampens a lot of the sound. And there's just not a lot of biodiversity in those forests.
And I guess the other really dominant thing in Sonoma County is the mixture of oak and bay laurel woodlands.
Yeah, so that was let's see if I had a good, here we go. Which I didn't spend time on this figure, but this shows you the land use around here. So the oak woodlands are out over here, and the conifer forests, when I was talking about the redwoods, are these dark areas out here near the coast where the marine layer comes in. So it's these areas out here, kind of oak forest woodland and kind of agriculture matrix, and out over here, this like brownish area is where there's actually a lot of biophony. And it's not that it's all native species, that some of that biophony is, dogs barking and other animals, and it's not, they're all not necessarily the rarest of the species, but there's just a lot of biotic activity in those areas.
Well, if you'd like some captures of horses whinnying for their food, I'd be glad to provide you with some ranger model on, because right now my horses are whinnying for their food and I can hear them outside.
We definitely have horses in our training data for that biophony. Yeah, lots of dogs, roosters, a lot of stuff.
So any more questions from anybody? Okay, I guess we got a quiet bunch today.